It's great to have an opportunity, Jen, to talk to you about your experience of team agreements. But before we get started with that conversation, please would you introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah. So my name's Jen Gardner and I work for the Stroke Association. And my current role is Associate Director. So I report into the Executive Director team. And in this role, I oversee our service delivery, our community engagement work, and our systems leadership work for the Northwest of England.
Thank you, Jen. We're going to be having a chat about team agreements. When was the first time you got introduced to the idea of a team coming up with some statements about how they wanted to be and behave together?
So I'd done some reading around team agreements following our new team getting together. So we were a fairly new team. In fact, I say we were a fairly new team. Everybody was new to the role that they were in, and I was new to the role to this level. And it became quite clear that people were feeling that we needed a bit more clarity. We needed to be working a little bit better together. So I did my own research and read around team agreements, went online to find out how you might do team agreements. And we had a couple of sessions where we tried to get a team agreement in place. But it's fair to say that whilst it felt that there was a lot of we were on similar pages, people were saying similar things, we really struggled to actually get that into a team agreement, away from the concepts of the ways that we wanted to work into what that actually meant and into an agreement. So that's when we reached out for help and from yourselves. And we've since been working with Michelle to create a team agreement, and she's come along to the team, reintroduced them really, and given us a method of being able to create one.
Thank you, because I know she's been part of a couple of your team meetings. How did it feel to introduce them? Because had you used anything similar in previous teams? Have there been any way of looking at how people work together as a team as opposed to operating in their roles?
No, it was actually completely new for me. So I've never had a team agreement, and when I first heard the idea of a team agreement, it felt like something that would be a document that somebody would create with a list of rules that
Mm-hmm.
would just sit on a shelf, and I'd be of no help, if I'm completely honest. And I've come 180 on that and seen that it can be a really useful living, breathing document that is sort of how enables us to do better work.
Oh, tell us a bit more about that. Where, before we go into the process of what Michelle did to support you to get to your collection of team agreements, how are they living? What happens now to make them something that actually is making a difference in your team?
Yeah, so I'll go back to the process, as you say, but
Mm.
because we co-created these and there was a lot of thought put into them, the final agreement that we've come up with is something that the team are all really bought into, and we're using confirmation practices with it to keep it front of mind. So the same process that we've used with other areas where we look at the team agreement, we score ourselves on each of the team agreements and sort of reflect on why we've given ourselves that score.
Mhm.
And then we're going off in twos. We did it with Michelle to begin with, but we're using coaching cards again to go off in smaller groups or twos or threes to coach each other on the area that we want to develop on and the actions that we're going to take to develop on that. And then we're putting those, we use Microsoft Teams a lot, and we've
Mhm.
got a team development channel within there. So we're all saying the area that we're going to be working on and the actions that we're going to be taking, so that we can see what each other's doing. And also it helps us hold ourselves to account. And we're trying to use them in our everyday language, and really hold ourselves and each other to account during team meetings and during discussions. I heard somebody the other day mention out loud, around, oh, I don't think I did very well on our number 6 team agreement, on in that, I'm really sorry. And that's around believing the best in others. So it's becoming part of our language about how we speak about where we're doing well and where we're not, but also by using Microsoft Teams and using that sort of pairing off and the discussion, and then the talking about it. It's become living and breathing. And the other thing that we've done is introduced a team agreement champion role, which is somebody who is there to keep it front of mind, to really champion it, to help people and encourage people around the use of it. So again, with that role, that's really sort of that they're demonstrating it, they're challenging, and they're helping with that review. So that's almost just creating it as part of our culture.
Wow, because we've had a previous conversation in a previous podcast about how you're using roles and confirmation practices for people to reflect on how well and how confident they feel in their role, and then setting themselves an objective or a goal to improve. So it sounds like, as well as doing that for your roles, you're doing it in relation to how you're showing up together as described in your team agreements. Is that right?
Yeah, and again, possibly a reason why the previous team agreements that we tried to put together may not have worked. Previously, we've talked a lot about the we'll do this, whereas the final statements that we came up with, Michelle, were I statements. So it's almost as if people are, it's again that personal development, their own personal development, and it's using 2 different areas of their work. So through their roles and using confirmation practices, that they're able to look at how they develop within their role, and this is sort of how they develop as part of a bigger team. So it's those 2 things alongside. But I think probably the fact that we're doing both at the same time has made it a more natural way of working, quicker than it might have become.
So you're both reflecting on how well you're doing your job, your role, and how well you're working together as a team. And can you give us some examples of your actual team agreements?
Yeah. So for example, I mentioned number 6. So that was around, I extend the most generous interpretation possible to the intentions, words, and actions of others, and I trust that people are doing the best that they can. That was one that we talked about. That at times can be that's one that's come through as a common theme as sometimes being difficult for people. Another one that a lot of the team have identified is asking for help is a positive thing. I recognize and reach out when I need help from other people. And I think that's one that a couple of people have said that maybe we don't do that enough, and that's why perhaps at times people feel overwhelmed. And another one that was one perhaps that we're not working on, but one that really made me reflect, Helen, when we came up with our team agreement, how well it aligned to the culture we want to create and our own organizational values. And that was I create a psychologically safe environment where we can all be authentic selves without judgment. So that was another one that came out from the team that really helped. And the final one that I'm working on personally is I accept that we are all human and we make mistakes. We create and provide opportunities to share both our mistakes and what we've learned through them with the wider team. And I think that particularly in the role that I have, for people to be able to see that and see me working on that will hopefully enable them to also reflect on that, work on that, because I am a great believer that to be really innovative in an organization, then you have to accept that we'll make mistakes and that you learn from them. But also, I think to be really human, we have to accept that we all make mistakes, and that's okay, so long as we learn from them.
Thank you, Jen. Are you comfortable saying a bit more about that? So what I think I heard you saying is that you as a team look at your team agreements individually using confirmation practices and identify the one that you perhaps feel you're demonstrating least strongly or not as well as others, and then are coached by one of your colleagues to set yourself a goal around that. So is the one that you've just described the one that you thought you wanted to do more or do better or to increase your focus on?
It is, yeah, it is. So through the coaching conversation, we looked at what I might be able to do within that. And part of that was to reflect and maybe reflect out loud. But part of it was also to create space to talk about mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
and to talk about what we've learned. So as one of the actions that I'm taking forward is to bring to our general meetings that the things that I'm learning as I'm going along, the mistakes that I'm making, and to talk about those and encourage others to talk about them as well. So it's the two things. My two actions are giving myself more time to reflect and document it so that I can understand what happened and what I've learned. And then I think the important part is to giving ourselves time within our meetings for that space.
So you're actually doing two things, aren't you? You're changing your individual behavior in terms of reflecting on when things haven't gone as you'd expected, or you feel like you've failed or made a mistake in some way, and being prepared to share that with your team, and changing a process, creating a space within team meetings to almost make that, I was going to say an expectation, I'm not sure whether you'd use that word, but create a space for other people who might want to share what's not gone so well for them and what they've learned. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess the first one enables me to better make use of the space and how we talk about it, and be more. I think that giving it more intention,
Mm-hmm.
um, as opposed to just sort of coming unprepared to talk about it, and hopefully, as I say, that enables others to if that's an area that they may identify, that will help them in that area as well.
And I know that being comfortable sharing mistakes is very explicitly documented in the Stroke Association's values. You talked about an alignment or a connection between the values of the organization and the team agreements that your team came up with. Was that just a happy accident? How did that happen?
It really was. So Michelle went through a process with us where we looked back at our own work history and looking through the jobs that we've done, what what was good, what were the best parts of those jobs, where we were really happy in our job or where we were working really well, what enabled that, and looking also at what where it didn't go well or whether it was a job that or a team that you were working in that wasn't great, what was the contributing factor for that. And from that, it sort of enabled us to see what makes a good team, almost
Mm-hmm.
what were the conditions that would create a good team. And then we used those to put them into statements of how we would sort of what we were committing to as a team that would make us that efficient and effective team. And it's quite a long process. We are I think Michelle's reflected a couple of times that we're all quite reflective people in
Mm-hmm.
my team, so we like to have a conversation but then go away and really reflect and come back. But as we were creating them and as the statements were coming out, they were all created without any sight of the values or the principles. But as I say, it just so happened that we sort of even started to use language which is in our values within the statements around we are human. As you say, that one really came through. So yeah, it was more of a happy coincidence.
Would you say then that so do you really need team agreements if people are living and understand the organization's values? Because I know there's some belief that you've got your values, you should just be living those. What are the benefits, if there are any, of teams really thinking that through for themselves?
So again, I think it comes back to this self-reflection. So understanding what the values are, or understanding what we think a good team looks like doesn't necessarily translate into actually being living the values and being that effective team. So I think the fact that we purposefully reflect on it, score ourselves, and then take action means that we're continually developing how we work as a team, as opposed to documents that we've had in the past where we understand them, we might know them, but we're not doing anything to improve against them or to develop how we sort of really live and breathe our values.
Thank you. How did you've mentioned a little bit about this, but please could you say a bit more about how Michelle supported you to co-create this list of statements that are your team agreements?
Yeah, so as I say, we went through the process of deciding what would make a good team by using our previous history. And then Michelle really helped us, because where we'd probably got stuck before is just lots and lots of words and lots of ideas. So she put us into groups and challenged us to really quickly try and come up with some statements. It didn't have to be polished, it didn't have to be finished. And I think that's possibly where in the past we've struggled with. We've wanted to be in a place where we were able to write a perfect team agreement and to be in the perfect place for it and the perfect time. Whereas I think Michelle really encouraged us to, let's get the best that we can get now, and you can tweak it, you can change it, you can develop it as you go. But she really supported us to really focus in and get those statements, those 9 statements that we were all happy with, down on paper and in writing. And I think if it had been left to us, we'd probably still be wordsmithing them now, because that's really easy to do. But actually, we got to a point where we were all happy with them. And they were good enough. And then what Michelle did, she went away and did some tweaks to turn them into I statements, and to put them into a template that had, again, the ability for us to reflect why we score ourselves, why we gave the scores, and then what we were going to do, similar to the way that we use for the role-based confirmation practices. And she did a session with the team then about using confirmation practices alongside team agreements, where she sort of again talked us through that process, and then we went off into groups to try it, and then came back and fed back to her. And some of the feedback was around how the confirmation practices worked alongside the team agreement. So some of the questions we found slightly more difficult, because when you're just looking at your own, when you're just reflecting on your own practice, the confirmation card really worked. When we used it for the team agreement, we were unsure as to whether we were looking at this from a team lens or from a personal lens. And so Michelle tweaked that again for us to make it so that we really understood the lens that we were looking through the questions at, and we were able to use them for our own development as a team member, as opposed to that sort of lens of developing a team, if that makes sense.
It does. That's been great learning for us. Because my understanding of the work that Michelle's been doing with your organization is a set of team agreements. So usually we statements about what we're committing to together. And then, as you say, Michelle translated them and put them into the format that we use for confirmation practices. When I say translate, just going from we to I. And we've worked with you to update the coaching card, the series of questions that we use in confirmation practices, to help people reflect on how they're doing and make it appropriate for team agreements and not just for roles. You mentioned it took some time. Is that sort of hours, weeks, days, months? How much time have you been spending with Michelle to get them to a place where you can use them without, as you say, excessive wordsmithing, but good enough and clear enough to use? I know that Michelle uses a checklist to help people be sure that they're clear enough. But if another organization was interested in doing this, how much time would you recommend they would need to put aside?
Yeah, so we had 2 sessions with Michelle, all online. So the first session where she went through, which was 2 hours, and she went through that process of us first generating the statements. We then went away for a short session together as a team to look at the statements and get to a point where we felt happy with them. And again, that was actually quite a lot quicker than I thought it might be, having already done so much work with Michelle. And then we came back for a session where we all agreed to commit to them, and Michelle just gave us some further information before we did a final session on using the confirmation card. So it was sort of 3 chunks of 2 hours, and then a small amount of time in between, and then ongoing we've all committed to 40 minutes once a month to look at it with another person, to sort of do that one-to-one coaching with each other. So not a substantial amount of time, but it was really good focused time. And just to compare, previously we spent whole day sessions trying to get this nailed down. So it was sort of quite concentrated, but really focused.
Thank you. And I know that Michelle is diligent, I think might be the word, in looking at commitment levels to them, because it's very easy, I'm sure, Jen, that you've been in lots of training courses and places where ground rules are agreed at the beginning of a session and everybody nods, and then they're rarely talked about again or mentioned again. So what was the process for really making sure that everybody was committed to these, was going to invest in them, was going to see them as a way of developing and reinforcing the culture that you're looking at?
Yeah, so Michelle went through us, and it was a bit of an eye-opening moment for me, if I'm honest, because at the end of developing them, and everybody being so keen, Michelle asked us all to rate how committed we were. And for those whose ratings were lower, then we spent some time talking about what would change that into fully committed, what was the barrier. And really, I think the barrier was that people were feeling that by committing to them, they had to say that they were currently at a place where they were doing them, and that was the issue. So they were really committed to the statements and the agreement that they were moving into, but they were really concerned that they weren't living up to that right now, and so could they commit to it? And so Michelle was good at helping us to understand that this is a commitment of how we want to work, but that we are working towards it. So long as the commitment is that we agree with that and we'll work towards it, it's okay not to be scoring, to feel you could score yourself highly for all of it, because that was the purpose of the then development afterwards. So after we'd had that session, Michelle had a couple of conversations with individuals to talk through what that was about, and that's where she got to. And then in between, that was the reason why we had the meeting in between, going back to speaking to Michelle again to really check if there was anything that we could change within them that would make people feel more able to commit. And we did make some tweaks, but I think it was the realization for them that they didn't have to be saying, I do that 100% right now. And so once we'd got clear about that, then people were really committed to them.
That sounds like a really important part of the process to me, that stops it being lip service, that stops it just being a list of 9 statements that's hidden somewhere on your computer or on your wall. And the fact that you're coming back for 40 minutes once a month to say, how am I personally doing in living the team agreements? That's a huge commitment, and really sounds like it has the potential to make it real. But you've also talked about a champion, a team agreement champion that isn't you, because usually when something isn't going so well in a team, somebody might have a little moan to the team leader or the manager, who's expected then to sort it out. But having a different person within the team being the champion is quite a different way of working. Would you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so Michelle introduced the champion role, and she did mention that often, to begin with, this would be the lead for the team, so it would be me, and then after a few months, that would be handed over to another person. But actually, on reflection, Michelle and I had a conversation around the fact that the team were really bought into this,
Hmm.
and actually the drive and the commitment to it would probably be even better if it came from someone else from within the team. And because they were all so energized by it, we felt that actually giving it to someone else would be good for their development, but would also make it feel less of a you have to do, and sort of a
Mm.
hierarchical, this is what
Hmm.
we're doing, and more of a we're sort of the team together. So one of the coaches has taken on the role of the champion, and I think I mentioned at the beginning around the sort of things that we're seeing them do, um that is encouraging everybody else to do it, as I say, about them just talking about it regularly, using the statements in conversation, perhaps pulling out sometimes when people gently helping to people see where maybe we're moving away from what we've agreed, and they're sort of supporting people and keeping an eye on the whether people are checking in on theirs and posting them on the team's channel. So and I think for them that's given them a real sort of own, ownership. They're really enjoying that, but it also is probably spreading that culture quicker amongst their peers because they have a lot more contact with each other than I have with them. So rather than it being a more of a when we meet once a month, it's hopefully more embedded in everyday conversations.
So that's real peer-to-peer development, isn't it? And I've seen the roles for this champion, and they're very explicit. Well, in the same way that you have roles for other areas of your work, it says what's expected, what the purpose is, what you'll see if this is going well. So it's fascinating that somebody in your team has already decided to take up that role. So were they voluntold? Did they volunteer? How did that come about?
Yeah, it actually it was probably more on the voluntold element in that we've got someone who's fairly new to the team,
Hmm.
but really, so the rest of the team had been in post for about 18 months, and we've had two new people start. They're really keen on this, and they've actually come in at the point that we've started this, so they
Hmm.
feel, it felt that it would give them a real place in the team and a real it's difficult sometimes when you come in and everybody's
Hmm.
working on projects and got what they're doing, whereas this felt like something that they could own and take forward. So I just spoke to them about it, and they were really keen to take it on, and that's given them, as I say, their purpose in the team, their place in the team, whilst they're going through their induction, and getting to a point where they can feel like they add value in other ways. So it's sort of given them that purpose and value adding element as well.
And is that a forever role that they'll be taking on, or how do you see that working?
And we've talked about the fact that that will rotate through people. So hopefully we're going to have a review in October with Michelle, and that's the first point that we thought that we might talk about that role and someone else doing it. But I think it would be something that it would be good to continually uh, move around until a time that we feel maybe that we're there and it doesn't need that role anymore.
Thank you. And what have you noticed any very practical changes to the way the team's working? If somebody was visiting the team 6 months ago before you started this work and was spending time with you now, is there anything that they would notice, do you think?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things have started happening that we're seeing a lot more. Um, I think because that me and another person both talked about being open and honest about our mistakes. And I think if you came to a team meeting, you would hear more about our learnings as opposed to just describing what we've done that went well. We do it's more accepted, and you'll hear it more talked about where we've struggled and what we've learned from that. There's also a lot of more challenge around. We're very good as a team um, about talking, but perhaps not um, creating action from that or being clear about whose role is what. So in team meetings, there's a lot more questioning when projects are talked about, when ideas are talked about, or when work is talked about, then there's a few people who are really questioning, can I just be clear, whose role is that? What do you need from me? And that sort of language is coming out a lot more within the teams as a result of it.
Thank you. And do you have to be a super team to do this? Does it work with project teams? What would you recommend to anybody else who might be interested in exploring this way of working?
I would say whatever team you are, or whatever part you are at in your development, that's where you can start with this. I think it would be helpful at any stage. And I think that's what we really learned from Michelle, that we don't have to be a really mature team who's already got a baseline of psychological safety and other effective and he's working effectively, and we want to go to highly effective. I think wherever you are, you can start there. And I think even if you were working effectively, because I think we'd got some good groundwork, it can work for you to move you higher up. So I guess my thought would be, wherever you are, that's where you start, and it can be useful for any type of team, because as I say, if it was a project team, that ability to add clarity about roles, responsibilities, and how we're gonna come together and be together would be useful in any situation.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much for sharing your experience of introducing team agreements and, most importantly, seeing them make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you.